Warning. Despite what the name may suggest, Cat CPR does not demonstrate how to perform CPR on a cat, though it is understandable that you came here thinking that it does. If your precious kitty cat is having an actual feline medical emergency, then stop listening to this now and contact your veterinarian immediately. However, once the emergency is over, we welcome your return. Thank you.
When we understand that beliefs are related and they hold different amounts of sway over us, it then follows to the next question, which is, it's not just what we believe. It's not just why we believe it. It's why do we want to believe it.
We're losing him.
Not on my watch.
Clear.
Welcome to Cat CPR. I'm Jeremiah.
Hi, I'm Matt.
And here we are with episode 1. Though, is it really episode 1, Matt?
It's episode 1.4.
Well, is this the 4th time we've tried to record episode? I thought it was the 5th.
So we did it twice with the iPhone. And then once with the mics that I chose that were no good.
The green screen too, though. I mean, was that part of the iPhone?
Oh, yeah. That was one of the iPhone ones.
Okay.
Yep. That was one of the iPhone ones. And then we did another one a few weeks ago with some microphones that I researched online, and they said they were going to be fantastic, right?
Well, everything you read about online, they say it's fantastic. They got to sell it.
Yeah. So I got an education on microphones.
Yeah.
I realized that there's this other kind of microphone called a dynamic microphone that people with podcasts use, and it's more narrow with the sound pickup. So if
is that what we're using right now? Is this the dynamic?
These are dynamic microphones.
Gotcha.
I talked to an audio engineer who had me sorted out in about 2.4 minutes.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, instead of the about 2.5 days I spent online looking at this stuff. So sometimes do it yourself is not the best approach.
Sure, but this episode should really be magnificent because of the amount of practice we've gotten into it. But it's a process.
Yeah,
we understand it's a process. But I mean, at this point, now that we're doing it our 4th, 5th time, I kind of want to try doing it 5 more times just so we have a good round number, like 10. Seems like the right amount of times we should try doing it before we actually release it.
Okay.
So this might not be the final version.
Well, I'll tell you what. If you decide you want to practice more. Let me know, and then we can go ahead and do this again.
Okay.
All
right. That sounds good.
Not a problem. But I think I'm going to be good after this one because, like I said, I have the second one ready to go, and hopefully we can record next week. We're recording this one on New Year's Eve in 2024, and I think the first time we recorded it, wasn't it right around Thanksgiving?
Yeah, it was.
It was. So, I really hope this goes a lot smoother. I know there's a learning curve on the front end, but
there is.
This one was steep.
We've got things ironed out there. Things are ironed out. That we took care of the visual aspect. We didn't want to do the green screen. We like the idea of the green screen.
I think we could do it for the funny bit.
Sure. And then of course we got it was the audio thing.
Right.
So we got that ironed out. So finally we're ready to produce episode 1. I'm excited.
We're ready.
I'm excited. Now we got to talk a little bit about the name, of course, Cat CPR, which of course is your brainchild. You came up with it. Some people are obviously going to like it. You deserve full credit. You see where I'm going with it. Some people are not going to like it. You also deserve full credit. Now, here's the thing about Cat CPR. So anytime, there's a standard practice that anytime you produce a podcast or a YouTube channel or something like that, you do a search.
Yeah.
To make sure the name is not taken. For example, I'm not here to plug my other YouTube channel, but I do have a gaming channel, The Sharp Corner. And the very first time before I produced it, I said, okay, well, let me see if there's any other Sharp Corners out there on YouTube. And I did a search. There was no other names by that, but I found a lot of videos of old women producing videos that says how to create a sharp corner with stitching and sewing, right? I was like, okay, well, that's fine. I'll just go ahead and produce.
Then your channel fit right in, right?
Exactly. It's a gaming channel, not for sewing. But did we not actually do a search for Cat CPR on YouTube before settling on the name?
Does the Fifth Amendment apply in this case?
You can use it. You can, but I mean,
I did not.
You did not.
I did not.
But there's good reason not to do it. I would think. You would think there's good reason. You don't need to do a search for Cat CPR because the question is what? How many people are actually performing CPR on their cat? Now, Matt, since then, what have we learned?
Bro, there's so many Cat CPR channels out there. I mean, when you suggested when we put the trailer out and people were like trying to look for it, right, without the link, I'm like, you got so many Cat CPR channels out there. And so I looked on it, and one of them was this lady with her mouth over a cat's mouth. Cat. And I'm like, I had no idea. I had no idea that was actually a thing.
I didn't either. And in the trailer, I'm kind of making fun of, I'm making fun of the name, and I'm jokingly saying, well, the problem is that people are actually going to be looking online to find out how to perform Cat CPR on their, how to perform CPR on their cat. And they're going to find this podcast. So after the trailer was released and people were like, well, how do I find your channel? We said, well, just do a search for Cat CPR.
Right.
That's when we discovered.
Right.
It's a thing.
It's a thing. It is absolutely a thing. It's one of those cases where truth is stranger than fiction, right?
It is. I mean, you're surprised, but you're not surprised, right? I'm surprised that there are so many videos of people saying, here's how you perform CPR on your animal or cat. But it being that it's the internet, I guess it shouldn't surprise me.
No. And thinking about it, it actually, I think now that I think about it, does make sense, right? Your cat stops breathing and something as bad is happening. I don't know if I would actually perform CPR on a cat. I'm more of a dog person. So I don't know. I don't know if I would perform CPR on a dog. I just don't know. I mean, but people love their pets.
They do.
And
hence the warning. That's why we also put the warning in.
We did. For
the video, which people have already seen. So if you're wondering, why are they putting that warning in there? It's because people actually are looking online on how to perform CPR on their cat.
But it's kind of a joke too.
It's kind of a joke, but the any great joke has a hint of truth to it.
It has an element of truth. Right.
And there is an element of truth to this. So
there is. There is. So, what we need to do is figure out how to actually get people to search for it and find it.
Right.
So maybe we'll change the channel to Cat CPR Podcast.
Something.
Or Cat CPR Channel.
Or maybe after enough searches, it'll be the first thing that comes up, which would also further anger.
Yes.
But, it's kind of brilliant I mean, in terms of marketing, I got to tip my hat to you in terms of brilliance because, stereotypically, what are most people looking at when it comes to the internet? Cat videos.
Yeah.
Right?
Really?
I mean, isn't that what most people are?
I guess.
Yeah. Okay. That's the joke, right? Internet is more for just than cat videos. So if people are looking for cat videos, maybe they'll come across us. But maybe let's take this time for you to explain your thought process behind it.
Sure. I assure you there was no brilliance involved. You've known me for a number of years now. I have a very weird sense of humor.
Sure.
It's a little bit quirky.
I like it.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Which is probably why you're here. I couldn't get anybody else that actually would.
It's not because I'm best suited. It's just because nobody
you
else
are my first choice, but you're
my
first choice because, we have such a great relationship because you don't mind my weirdness.
I don't. I accept it.
And that's good. That's good. I'm not everybody's cup of tea and neither one of us, nobody is anybody's full cup of tea all the time. But no, the reason is I was thinking, I've been in ministry now 32 years. So I think next week or tomorrow, since tomorrow's New Year's Day, calendar year wise, it's 33 years. So I've seen a lot of things that have happened during those time frames. And one of the things that I've seen, and sometimes this happens in churches, where people say, you really shouldn't go down that rabbit hole. And the reason you shouldn't go down that rabbit hole is because people suffer shipwreck in their faith.
Okay, when you're talking rabbit hole, you're talking about things that are a little controversial that may unearth some things that people don't want to know.
That's exactly it. And sometimes people in their growth in Christianity or sometimes in the religious world, maybe that's a better way to say it, in the religious world, they sometimes make overstatements on things that don't necessarily pan out.
Okay.
And when people get into topics like the canon, which is our next episode on the Old Testament, or they get into things like textual criticism, they find things because it depends on who it's framed by, which is one of the things we really want to do this episode. People think, well, why are you having this episode on an introduction? It's to frame some very important things, I think, as we go through this. So what happens is people don't frame things properly. Mm-hmm. And then someone comes in and finds out later, that wasn't true. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a little story. Like I was a little kid up in Maine where I grew up, and I believed in, oh, by the way, if your kids believe in the Tooth Fairy, Easter Bunny, or Santa Claus, you might want to, rush them out of the room on this one. But I was about 5 or 6 maybe, and we were celebrating Easter. We dyed a bunch of Easter eggs, and I got up early that morning before anybody else. And I'm running downstairs. I'm thinking maybe I can see the Easter Bunny.
Catching himself in before he doesn't do this chimney. That's Santa. What does the Easter Bunny do? All right. Anyway.
And so then I look on the table, and the eggs are exactly where we left them the night before. And my little 5, 6-year-old brain deduced my parents are the ones that are actually putting these out, not the Easter Bunny. And my first reaction, maybe I was just way too serious as a kid. I don't think so. I had a lot of fun. I thought, they lied to me. They lied to me. And so then I think, what else did they lie to me about? I bet the Tooth Fairy's not real. I bet Santa's not real. I bet God might not be real.
Ooh, yeah.
And again, that's the way
connecting some dots there.
Yeah, that's the way my little 5, 6-year-old brain went through. So sometimes with good motives, churches might present things to Christians and say, this is the way that it is. And in order to bolster faith, because they don't sometimes use real proof or evidence to guide people that way. They do experience as the primary aspect of it, and that just doesn't work. So when they lead with those things and they don't have evidence or proof to back things up,
or they tell people just to believe it.
Yes, and then they make wild, broad claims that if somebody looks a little bit deeper, they find out that's not really true.
Right.
That's not really true. Someone might go in there and say, well, what else did they lie to me about? And they start to lose their faith. Our goal is to revive curiosity, hence Cat CPR, curiosity killed the cat. We want to revive curiosity. And it's the CPR, the clear on the intro. Brilliant job, by the way. That's exactly what we're looking for.
Yeah, we're trying to and it's kind of and that's one of the things that really interests me about partnering with you on this, is because when I was growing up, speaking of childhoods, curiosity was discouraged.
Sure.
I remember when I started, asking questions, and I would ask, church leaders, even my parents, well, who is God? Where did God come from? If God made everything, who made God? I mean, these are questions that typical kids would ask.
Absolutely.
And it really surprised me that those questions were discouraged. And I realized that, the reasons they were discouraged is because the people who I was asking didn't have the answers. And then there's this other aspect of, because our salvation is based on faith.
Right.
If you ask questions, that indicates, or could be an indicator of, weak faith. A weak faith means that you could be jeopardizing your salvation. So you're better off just not asking questions.
Right.
Now, our approach is going to be completely different.
Yes.
Let's ask the hard questions, because truth does not fear examination.
Right.
Let's ask the hard questions and let's see if we can find an answer.
Exactly. And the process that we've been going through on this has been really great for me. So like I said, 33 years in the ministry, but for most of that time, I actually worked full time. I was in the financial world for most of that time frame, and was still working full time in the church, still preaching and teaching in the church full time. But that means my time was divided. I'm putting in 50 hours a week, sometimes up to 70 hours a week in the regular career, and then I'm doing about 30 hours a week in the church. I mean, what was a lot. So a lot of these things I've studied, but not to this level. I mean, hours and hours and hours into these things. And you're finding arguments now because of the internet, because of how things have come out, that are actually things that I've never heard before. And what I've discovered through this whole process is that this is helping me build my faith. I'm actually more convinced that the Bible is true, but the way that we want to approach this is in a very objective way.
So trying to set aside bias.
Yes.
And actually look at the evidence and say, what is it actually telling us? What does it actually say?
At the very least, acknowledging bias.
Okay.
And then, yes, once you acknowledge it, let's try to set this thing aside and look at the evidence, because, you're a truth seeker, I'm a truth seeker. In other words, if the evidence pointed to no God and it was conclusively shown, I would probably abandon my belief in God to some extent, or maybe compromise and have a few different variations where I would create a system that was more to my liking, right? But I actually really love the system that God has created. It's produced great results, but it's based upon, and this is something that I believe for a long time. I've looked at the evidence, I've looked at the proof, I've looked at those things, and my faith is not based on experience. First and foremost, it's based upon truth, and it's based upon evidence. So with Cat CPR, the concept is we don't need to fear that. And so what happens is that people get really nervous because they say, okay, well, what if somebody goes in there, finds the evidence, and looks at both sides, and then makes the decision, I don't want to believe anymore. That's how God set the system up.
It is.
That's how God set the system up. And if it wasn't that, it would have been something else, because just as much as people look at the evidence and say, no, I don't want that. I got to move that next time.
You got a little plant over there?
Yeah. He's my friend. We brought him up from Florida and he's doing really well.
Yeah. It's all in your business too. Okay.
Yeah. He's very interested in what's going on. So I also know that there are people who look at the evidence and then say, I'm not an atheist or an agnostic anymore.
Right.
So what we're trying to do is just present evidence and then ask the question, which we'll get to here in a moment, why do I want to believe the things that I believe?
Sure. Now, this is kind of interesting because a lot of times when we think about examining evidence and trying to make a determination of something, I think a lot of times people relate it to faith and spiritual matters. But one thing we need to understand is this is something that we see every day in our everyday life. For example, a court case. You've got a juror of 12 people. They're all looking at the same evidence.
Yeah.
But some people are walking away with one conclusion. Other people are walking away with a completely different conclusion.
Right.
Now, the verdict that they come up with in their own mind, that is, it's based on the evidence that they're looking at. Why are they coming up with this verdict? Why are they coming up with this conclusion? This is part of the reason why we have hung juries. Because 12 people can look at the exact same evidence and walk away with different conclusions.
Yes.
So it's not just faith doesn't necessarily just pertain to spiritual matters. It pertains to anything that you have not seen the event of, but you're looking at the evidence to try to come up with a clear conclusion.
See, and that's a perfect analogy because it's based upon evidence.
It is.
But what's the ultimate decider? It's faith that evidence is true.
Right.
It's faith that evidence is true. And based upon faith in the evidence that's given, we make decisions that deprive people of liberty, that give restitution to those who are victims. But it also, and because it's imperfect, sometimes allows the guilty to go free or the innocent get punished.
Right.
The thing about the religious concept of if the God of the Bible is true, then our conviction is that that's not going to happen there, that he's going to judge perfectly. And that's actually going to be another episode that we're going to do. Because I've got 5 years of these things played out at least.
I got it.
So one of the episodes that I want to do is do we want the God of the Bible to be the ultimate judge, or do we not want there to be an ultimate judge, or do we want that ultimate judge to be changeable, or do we want him to be absolutely firm, rigidly firm, so much so that people don't like it?
Right.
And there's consequences to all of those different types of things. But again, Cat CPR, it is weird, but there's a message behind it that hopefully will resonate with people. We just got to find a way to get those folks that are having a genuine feline medical emergency to the right place. So I like the warning up front.
It shows that we're sensitive to others.
We're sensitive.
Right? I mean, when we're talking about faith-based things, we're not trying to offend anybody. We're sensitive to others.
We're sensitive.
The warning says so.
And making fun a little bit because having a little bit of a joke in there,
Right.
I know when cats are when they need CPR, it's not a joke.
Right.
It's serious.
This is serious stuff. This is
serious
stuff. Okay. But we're talking about something big here. We're talking about God. We're talking about faith. We're talking about something that has really big implications.
Yeah.
Big time implications. So, but of course we want to approach it from a logical, objective standpoint. So the question is, where do we begin? Where do we start? I mean, how do we even begin to approach this?
Yeah. So we're going to dive into a little bit of a philosophy of how we're going to approach things. But one thing I'd like to do first, there's something that we really, really, really have to avoid.
Okay.
And that's
Pause for dramatic effect.
Pause for dramatic effect. overstating our conclusions.
Now, this is something that we probably see quite often today, especially in the world of the internet, right?
It's the way you get views, man.
It's how you get. So we're actually going to be going against the grain. We're going to be paddling upriver, where most people do a certain thing in order to get views. We're going to be doing the opposite. We're not overstating our conclusions.
Well, what we're hoping is that people who want a little bit more objectivity in the approach to this type of thing might tune in, right? Might tune in. But, I want to avoid the clickbait theology, right? Where we have things like, Lennox absolutely destroys atheism, or Hitchens owns theists, or Harris dismantles theistic belief system. And you watch the videos and you're like, okay, there were some good points made there, but I'm either still a theist or I'm still an atheist, and it didn't destroy my belief system. Right. So sometimes what happens?
They oversold it a little bit.
They oversell stuff, and it happens on both sides.
It does. It does.
We're going to be equal opportunity in making fun of stuff, but we're also going to be equal opportunity in making fun of ourselves.
Sure.
I've obviously figured out through certain things that I've had a tendency to oversell some things at times. And I really don't want to do that. And it comes from zeal. It comes from zeal. Sure. I mean, when you're giving a speech or you're up in front of a few hundred people or something like that. And I mean, sometimes you can get caught up in you're zealous and you make a statement and, in the heat of the moment. And then you think about it afterwards and you're like, that might not have been 100% accurate. I might have overstated that a little bit. It wasn't an intent.
Right. You just get caught up in the moment.
But there might be a better way to do it. So that's been good for this because, again, when you look at these things and you're saying, okay, we need to face our biases here. Am I facing mine?
Right. And this is going to be kind of going against the cultural norm these days because we do live in the age of the internet where everybody wants something right away. If you want something, a product, where do you go? Amazon. It's there the next day, 2 days after, something like that. If you want to find out the statistics of something, you just put it in on Google. You immediately get it. So you can kind of see where this clickbait approach has a lot of appeal.
Yes.
Because people can get something right away. But when we're talking about something as big as what we're talking about here, faith, God, creation, I'm sure we're going to talk about evolution. I mean, these things that have big time implications. Yes. It's not something you're going to get an answer for within a few clicks of the button.
No, we're not going to be able to answer all of these questions in a reel, a 30-second, 1 minute, minute and a half reel. It's not going to happen.
So you got to be invested. You have to invest in the podcast.
You do. You do. Hopefully you will.
Hopefully you will.
Hopefully
it's going to take more than just one episode to kind of get through this stuff. That's the point. It's going to take more than one episode.
And that's why we're doing the philosophy aspect of it. So the first thing we're really going to do is we're going to start by defining a few terms that we need to go over. And we're going to start with something called noetic structure and figure out how we framework, the framework which our beliefs are set on and how that operates.
Okay. That sounds like a great place to start. So let's, what do you say we get into it?
Let's do it.
Okay. So it is now time to begin. It's time to dig in, to get started. And where do we begin? Where do we start?
At the beginning.
At the beginning.
At the beginning. So for us, that is a concept called noetic structure. Now, it comes from the Greek word, noetic comes from the Greek word knowledge. So basically, this is one of the things that we're taking a look at. It's a construct made by a guy named Alvin Plantinga. You know what I think of whenever I think of Alvin?
I want to say Alvin and the Chipmunks,
yeah.
But I mean, we're showing our age a little bit there. I don't know if kids these days, well, no, they did make a modern one. They did. Here's some clips.
Yeah. So, but the one that I remember, believe it or not, I was born in 1972, so I remember the one from the 1960s.
The original.
And then the main one was the one I grew up with in the 1980s, which had the really super annoying theme song. Here that is. So, but Alvin Plantinga, he's a Reformed theologian, super intelligent. I think he's still alive, and he taught at places like Notre Dame and Harvard, or at least went to school at those places.
When you say Reformed theologian, it's like he was an atheist, but now or
Reformed theologian as in Calvinist.
Calvinist, okay.
Calvinist, yep. Gotcha. So Reformed theology, and he came up with this concept of noetic structure. I learned about this when I was in Bible college, and I just thought it very handy to be able to understand how these things operate and how they work. So basically consider it like a framework by which you hang everything you believe, and it's all connected in some way. But I mean, some are maybe not connected at all. Some are extremely connected. Some are more conditionally connected, and that's really the first aspect of this. It's essentially the sum total of everything you believe. It's just a way that we can see it in a picture in our mind and understand it.
Kind of makes me think of like what makes a person them. Like, you know, just this is why I have the view that I have.
It's everything about you.
Everything about you. Okay.
Everything about you. Everything about you that you believe.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And so as you can imagine, that's complicated.
Yeah, because some beliefs are stronger than others. Some are not relevant, whereas some are relevant. So that's got a lot of connecting parts here.
There's a tremendous amount of connecting parts, and so think of it as like this framework, but everything's like webbed. Sometimes there's a really bold connection to another one. Sometimes it's a dotted connection, but right in the middle is the defining belief, which we'll get to in a bit. The defining belief of who you are that everything else stems from. And what we're going to try to help folks do is if I could reduce myself down to one belief where everything else came from, what would that be?
Right.
What would that be?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess for guys like us, of course, it would be our belief in God. But, you know, I can remember even before being a Christian, you know, I used to play drums in a band. And then when I became a dad, I basically had to decide, do I continue to play in a band and play drums, or do I put that aside so I can focus more on family? Because it turns out when you have a newborn baby, going to play with the band a few nights a week, and then, you know, staying up till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning to play shows, it's not good for being a good dad, you know, for being a present dad. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, well, if I give up drums and being a drummer, who am I?
Yes.
If I'm not Jeremiah the drummer, who am I? I was having an identity crisis.
Yeah, and the thing is, I didn't know you back then.
Right.
But my contact picture for you
Oh, with the hair?
is with you with the
okay.
hair. Yeah. It's glorious, folks. It's glorious. I mean, I wish I could have had hair like that. It was impressive.
I still wonder if I could still grow it out like that, but we'll never know because I'm not doing it. It's a lot of work to grow that out. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But am I correct in assuming that guys like us, the most important part of our belief would be God?
Yes. And I think so. But for other folks, it might not be. And again, when we're looking at these types of things, we're looking at this more in an objective fashion, not in a, here's what your belief system should be. You know, we're going to advocate for different things as we go through, present evidence. But again, it's going to be up to the individual to decide what it is that they want to talk about. So, or believe. So one of the things that we want to discuss, of course, number one, sum total of everything that you believe. Number two, it's characterized by the way the beliefs are related. I mean, they can be completely and totally related where one stems from the other. They can be conditionally related based upon circumstance or nostalgia, or they might be completely unrelated, and they might exist on polar opposite ends of the noetic structure. Now, sometimes they can be related logically, and one of the things that I like to bring up, because it's interesting, I think, is that sometimes they can be related by contradiction, which is a form of logical entanglement, so to speak.
It sounds like a paradox for something to be logical and contradictory. Because contradiction sounds illogical to me. But anyway, yeah, keep going. I'm sure you're going to expel this out. But contradiction
is very logical. Now, what they believe might be illogical. If they believe two contradictory things at the same time, that would be illogical. But it would be illogical in the scope of logic, because illogical is based on logic.
I need more coffee now.
No, it's okay. It's okay. So...
Well, break this down give me some examples. Give us some examples.
Sure. So, for example, I grew up in Maine. Well, I was born in Maine, moved to Florida when I was a kid, and been a Patriots fan since I was a tiny kid. I haven't really been watching football a whole lot lately. Just too busy to watch it. But I remember...
Matt still thinks Tom Brady is the quarterback of the Patriots, because that's when the last time he watched the Patriots game, right?
Oh, he's not?
No.
Just kidding. No. I know. But it's the Patriots season this year. I do know this much shows that he's not the quarterback anymore. But I remember watching the 2017 Super Bowl, and I think it still holds the record of the largest comeback ever. and it was fantastic. So if I had these two claims that existed in my head at the same time, number one, the New England Patriots won the 2017 Super Bowl, or number two, the Atlanta Falcons won the 2017 Super Bowl, those would be two beliefs that are related by contradiction.
Gotcha. Because somebody had to win.
Right. So I technically can't hold those beliefs at the same time. And if I did, then we would have a little bit of an issue. Right.
I mean, I guess you could find a way to justify it. Like, if everybody had fun, then everybody did win. But we're talking about who had more points at the end of the game. It had to be either the Patriots or the Falcons.
Fun.
Okay.
Yeah, nobody wins, right?
Right. So, I mean, it's got to be one or the other. Okay, I got that.
Exactly. So, but when people do hold, I mean, there's a term for it called cognitive dissonance, where people, you can't hold to contradictory beliefs in your head at the same time. But we've met a lot of people that do. And sometimes you find out that you do. And that's really where people hold those beliefs, because they can't knowingly, I think, hold them at the same time. But on the other end of the spectrum, maybe not understanding that they're related, they can hold them. But as soon as they find out that they're in contradiction to each other, decisions have to be made.
Right. And sometimes those decisions are avoided. We see that quite often. Okay.
Exactly.
Right.
So sometimes the beliefs have nothing to do with logic, but could be psychological. Okay. Emotional, out of habit. I'll give you an example. Every time I go to an Asian restaurant, every time, and I see dumplings on the menu, I automatically go back to where the best dumplings on the face of the earth are.
Oh, which is where? Is it our sponsor?
No, I wish, but we're in Virginia. These folks are in Merritt Island, Florida, a restaurant called Wabi Sabi on North Courtney Parkway. Absolutely phenomenal. Best. Every time I take somebody there when we're back home, everybody loves it, right? It's their new favorite place. So that place is great. And so I end up comparing
every time,
every dumpling I ever have here with that. And I'm sure they're good, but when you've had the best, it's always disappointing.
Right.
You just live in a perpetual state of disappointment. One of these days, though, I still hold out hope. I still have faith. I'm gonna find a great dumpling.
Maybe they'll ship us some dumplings. Maybe they'll become subscribers of our channel. They're going to ship us some, and we can enjoy them while we're recording an episode one day. Okay,
that would be great.
Right, but that doesn't necessarily mean those are the best dumplings. I mean, that's kind of a subjective.
Watch your mouth.
Okay. But that's subjective, right? I mean, that's when we're talking about an emotional connection or something that's out of habit.
It's totally subjective.
Okay.
It's totally subjective. And anything where you say this is the best, especially when it comes to things like taste or preferences, those are challenging. Those are challenging. So we have to be concerned about how those things operate.
Okay, gotcha.
And then our beliefs really do get brought back down into two concepts. We have basic beliefs and non-basic beliefs. So think of basic beliefs as foundational and non-basic beliefs as more peripheral or built on your foundational beliefs.
Okay. I mean, that makes me think that the foundational beliefs, that's a little bit more important. And, your non-basic ones, it's going to be a result of whatever your basic is.
Yeah, that's basically it. Okay. That's basically it. And so what we have, and what's interesting is sometimes a foundational belief might not seem very foundational at the time, but if you ask a couple questions, you'll find out that it actually is. For example, 3 times 7 equals 21.
People on the internet are going crazy right now. They want to argue that all day long. No, I'm with you. Yeah, okay, I'm with that. Yeah, that's.
There are some people who start to question basic math.
They do.
And what ends up happening is the entire basis of reality falls apart.
Right.
Yeah. Because 3 times 7 equals 21, not something we use a whole lot, except when you're needing to know what 3 times 7 is.
Right.
And you do it instantaneously behind the scenes in your mind. But what happens if you were to find out that 3 times 7 was not 21?
So on the surface, you would think, okay, well, no big deal. Who cares? It's a math equation. But when we think about the fact that math is, there's a mathematical equation for everything.
Yeah.
There's a mathematical equation for gravity, and gravity is holding us down. So if the math that we know is wrong, it can have dire consequences. I mean, math is used in engineering. Engineers use math to create dams that hold back water that keeps entire towns from being flooded. So if 3 times 7 doesn't equal 21, something as simple as that, there's a lot of towns that are going to be underwater. You see what I mean? I mean, again, if the math is wrong and that dictates almost everything that we do, that's got some really big implications.
If math
Dire
is subjective,
consequences.
if math is subjective,
Right.
we would start to question the very basis of reality.
Right.
Right. So it's not that 3 times 7 equals 21 is particularly profound and something that I think about every single day, and I'm just really thankful that I have multiplication tables. That's not it. It's what it represents.
Right.
It represents the basis, a solid basis of reality.
Yep.
Right. So that would be considered a foundational belief, even though it doesn't necessarily have a lot of sway over my life on a day-to-day basis. But what it represents does have a huge sway on my life. For example, let's take a look at a non-basic belief, a non-foundational belief. My house is 80 miles from Washington, D.C., where we're sitting right now. That is not something... something that I believed, based on this podcast. I don't believe it anymore because we looked it up. But, it's something that I believed quite tentatively. I didn't get exact. There's no decimal point there.
It's an approximation.
It's an approximation, from my house to the center of DC. I feel like I'm a little too close to DC as it is, right?
Right.
But, that's what it is. So that really doesn't have a whole lot of sway over my life on a day-to-day basis, just like 3 times 7 equals 21 doesn't have a whole lot of sway. However, if I were to find out that I did not live exactly 80 miles from Washington, D.C., it wouldn't rock my world.
No biggie. Okay.
Now, so that was number 3. That was beliefs have varying degrees of conviction, certainty, and firmness. I probably should have said that up front, but you'll put the post-production note up that I screwed up on this one, okay? Now, what about number 4, which is beliefs will differ in the amount of influence that they have on other beliefs. Okay? So again, you mentioned this belief back at the beginning. We're all made in God's image. That's something that we believe.
Right.
And that belief that we're all made in God's image, that affects the way that I treat people on a day-to-day basis. I believe that every single person, whether I agree with them or not, whether they live a life that I don't agree with, I still believe that they're intrinsically made in the image of God and therefore worthy of value, worthy of respect, worthy of love. And so I will treat them with respect. I will treat them with compassion, because I believe they're made in the image of God, even if they don't believe in God.
Right. And I know that might seem minor. It's like 3 times 7. How big of a deal is that? I know that it might seem minor because a lot of people who don't believe in God will say, well, yeah, people have value. We agree with that, even though we don't believe in God. And I hate to go to the extreme other end of the spectrum, but hey, let's go there anyway. Nazi Germany,
Sure.
Right? How did they view Jews? Not as people, less than people. How did that impact the way they treated them? Right?
Right.
Horribly.
Right.
Holocaust. Millions of them were executed. Okay. So we see how that's a core and very important belief. If we believe in God and that God values people, we want to share, we're made in his image, we want to share that value. So we're going to treat people a certain way. We see the impact of our belief in our outward behaviors.
Yes. And so we see naturalistic systems like Nazi Germany did that.
Right.
We see, the revolution in China and the revolution in the Soviet Union did the same thing under a naturalistic perspective. Happens under a theistic perspective too.
It does.
The Crusades.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, both sides have been very, very guilty of that. And, our belief system is that from a conservative Christian, believing the scriptures mentality, that all of those things weren't correct. So
correct. So you're hearing this on the Crusades.
Yes.
The way they went about, not correct.
Not
correct.
Not the way it should have been done.
Complete misapplication.
Absolutely. And based upon faulty theology.
Right.
So, faulty theology leads to, especially when it's combined with political, ambition.
I'm thinking about this meme I saw not too long ago. It's like when the United States finds out that there's, tons of resources available in Africa and everybody needs Jesus. Hey!
Right. Exactly.
We've got a good reason to go to Africa. They need Jesus and they've got abundant resources. So here we go. Yeah, okay.
So we take that belief that God exists, that we're made in God's image. If I abandon that belief system,
how's that going to impact how you treat others?
How's that going to impact how I treat? So that one, it would dramatically impact. And that one is actually based on my belief that God exists. Mm-hmm. So if I did not believe that God exists anymore, it would dramatically change my entire system. Mm-hmm. It would change the way that I treated you. It would change the way I treated my family, my wife. It would change what I do on a day-to-day basis. It would change my career. It would change everything that I do. Mm-hmm. But for example, that belief that I had that my house is 80 miles from DC, I did the Google map and I found out that it's 96.7. Yeah. So you know what I did?
Is your world rocked now?
I cried for days.
Oh, because you're not closer to DC?
No, because I wish I was further. No, but like I said, I swapped it out. Mm-hmm. I swapped it out instantaneously.
No big deal.
And went about my day.
What about your day? Right.
Yeah, it probably took less than 0.5 seconds.
So your existence was not questioned.
No, not at all.
As a result of being farther away from DC.
Right, because that one is so far away from the center of the noetic structure. It's way on the outside, and it didn't really matter to me.
Gotcha.
Right. So now if I found out that a mile wasn't really a mile, or our measures of distance were completely off, that might have a little bit more of an impact.
Sure.
But just the fact that I was wrong, I can swap that out pretty quickly.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So upon the scaffolding of the noetic structure, we place everything that we believe. And so the reason that we're going through this philosophical kind of discussion here on this is, and I get it, this stuff, a lot of it is really simplistic. And people probably, come on, get to the good stuff.
We're going from the ground up here.
We are.
Ground up.
And I don't want it to be so simplistic that people are, just yawning and turning this off. But this is where I think it matters.
Sure.
When we understand that beliefs are related and they hold different amounts of sway over us, it then follows to the next question, which is, it's not just what we believe. It's not just why we believe it. It's why do we want to believe it? And this, I think, is the fundamental question that we have to answer.
Right. So we're actually kind of investigating motive here.
Motive is key. Will is key. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely key. Because think about this. Two people look at the exact same set of data, the exact same set of evidence, and they walk away with completely opposite viewpoints. I mean, we just got done. Like I said, this is New Year's Eve, 2024. We just got done with a huge contentious election. Mm-hmm. People had the access to the same information if they wanted it, and people walk away with completely different viewpoints. What's that based on? That's based on their will.
Right.
It's based upon what they want. And so when we get to empirical evidence, or we get to a set of data, or we get to any kind of proof or those types of things, we have to ask the question, what role does my will play in my interpretation of this? Mm-hmm. And is that correct? Am I strong enough to challenge my presuppositions, my will, my motive, and I'll look at something honestly and change my mind? But I might not want to change my mind.
And of course, saying this is a lot easier than doing it.
Yes.
Because we are talking about facing some things, again, that could have some pretty big implications here.
Huge.
The existence of God, not the existence of God, big implications. So obviously we have to make sure that we are being presented with the correct facts and the correct evidence first.
Right.
Again, we're just kind of building this thing up, but that's kind of where you have to start. What are we even basing our conclusions on in the first place? So how do we put all this will stuff aside and all this bias stuff aside so that we can examine evidence objectively?
The first step is acknowledging that it exists.
Okay.
That's the absolute first step. So we have to acknowledge that it exists, and then we have to ask ourselves a question. Am I willing to check that at the door as much as possible to really look at these things? And then when you reach a conclusion, we say, okay, what role did my will play in reaching that conclusion?
Gotcha. Okay. Well, why don't we start kind of getting into some of the ways that we can examine truth, some of the ways we can examine evidence, so that we can make sure that we're making, correct determinations. Is that a good place to go next?
You read my mind, or you read the outline.
It's one or the other.
Yeah, one or the other.
At this time, because this is our 5th, 6th, 100th time recording this episode, I mean, I kind of know where we're going with this, but yeah, let's just use that for a transition, and let's kind of talk about truth next. Does that work?
That was probably the smoothest transition we'll ever do.
So we're going to go to truth next. Okay, so now it is time to ask the question, how, Matt, do we even determine truth? What is truth?
Yeah, great question. It's one that's been asked throughout the ages,
Indeed,
right?
Indeed.
Remember reading about Pilate asking Christ that at the trial. So truth is obviously up for debate. Right, especially this day and age, it's very, very much up for debate.
It is.
But there's different methods that apply to different subjects, and that's really what we want to go over today.
Okay.
Because sometimes, when I see some of the videos that I see or read some of the books that I read, I hear people say, well, if I just want hard evidence that God exists, I want him to come down, appear before me, and show himself, and then I would believe him. Well, the thing is that we have evidence of that happening in the past and people not responding well. But I also think that somebody, if they didn't want to believe it, they would just simply look and say, well, man, did I have a bad mushroom or something?
Right.
Or, was I having a break from reality? Can I really trust my senses? That stuff happens all the time. So even people who say, yes, I would like something physical, something hard proof, some hard proof in front of me, it probably wouldn't work that way either. And I personally think, and we'll get to this in other episodes, I personally think the way that God set this up is ideal.
Well,
it's perfect.
I think we can definitely make an argument using Scripture. Again, I know we're not getting into Scripture, but we look at the Israelites who came out of Egypt and saw God perform all those miracles, and they saw it with their physical eyes. And how long did it take for them to say, let's make this golden calf? Maybe that's really what led us out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and I've been there. I've talked to people and asked them, what would it take for you to believe that God actually exists? And they said the exact same thing that you said. Well, if he would appear to me in some supernatural, unexplicable means, according to the criteria that I set up,
right,
then I'll believe.
Right.
But even then, when people have these spiritual experiences, they tend to go back and say, well, was that actually a spiritual experience, or was I just getting a shot of caffeine because I had my morning coffee?
Yeah, exactly. So, and I always find it interesting that everybody has different criteria of how God should work with them.
Right.
But that's another topic for another time. Again, we could do a whole episode on that, can't we?
Yeah. I know.
So, we want to just focus on the different methodologies that people employ to examine truth.
And this is not necessarily talking about spiritual things. This is talking about anything.
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 Matter of fact, the first thing that we're going to start off with is the naturalistic worldview,
okay,
which is empirical observation, the scientific method.
The scientific method. It's scientific.
And it's a method.
Indeed.
Yes. So, example, why is the sky blue?
Mm-hmm.
You research it, and why is the sky blue? It's because of the Rayleigh effect. It's empirically observed, I have my notes here, by studying how light interacts with the Earth's atmosphere, particularly how shorter wavelengths of blue light scatter more than longer wavelengths like red.
Mm-hmm. It's something we can see. It's something we can observe.
Yes, we can understand it. When we look at medicine, when we look at science, when we look at things that are repeatable and observable, we employ the scientific method to figure out what's truth, what's accurate. Now, the interesting thing is this is utilizing something we'll get to in a second called inductive reasoning, but you actually can't be 100% sure of the results, which is why science is always questioning itself.
Right.
Always questioning, which it should.
Because of all the variables, all the different factors that can kind of play into it.
Yeah. Yes. And so real science, real
as opposed to fake.
Real science questions itself. Now, again, we've seen, especially in the last several years, that you can have a bias and bring that into the scientific world and do all kinds of things that might be good, that might be bad. And we've seen that in history. Eugenics, horrible system that was based on science, right?
Right.
And you brought up Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
Based on science.
Based
the
on
Jews
science.
are
Right.
inferior.
Right.
Black people are inferior. I mean,
Yeah, we saw that definitely in the 1940s and the 1950s.
Well, in our history as a country, we've seen that the mindset and attitude there. So not good.
Right.
Right. So we have to go back and check the biases, even with things like the scientific method. So I mentioned John Lennox earlier. I like a lot of his stuff, and so he's a scientist. He's a theist in the way that he approaches things. And one of the things that I've always found really interesting is that he talks about the faith in systems that people have. So he talks about the faith that scientists have to have in the systems that they engage in, and the belief that people who believe those scientists have to have. So you have someone that comes from a naturalistic perspective, and they say, I don't operate by faith, I operate on proof. Are you an expert in biochemistry? Are you an expert in paleontology and geology? Are you able to do uranium dating? Are you able to do carbon-14 dating? Are you able to understand? Now, some people might. The vast majority of people who are naturalists have faith in the scientists who say they're doing that.
Right. Even though that they don't know what evidence is being conducted. They
Yes.
say, I mean, it's kind of blind faith. If the scientist who knows more than I do says this, then I'm going to bank on that.
Exactly. And so is that a bias that we might want to recognize?
Sure.
You know,
Sure.
I am not. So you have people who say, well, I don't believe the Bible because of textual criticism. Have you looked at the text?
Or have you just heard of the people who claim
Right.
that there's a textual criticism?
Right.
Okay. I
So
gotcha.
these types of things.
Sure.
Now, again, I'm not a super expert in a lot of these things. I've studied Greek and Hebrew, so I know them. It's been a long time ago. 1995 is when I graduated. So, it's sometimes certain aspects are a little bit rusty. I don't know Latin though, so I can't look at Latin manuscripts, right? And the Hebrew that I learned is modern Aramaic lettering, ancient Hebrew. A little bit sketchy on the letters look a little bit different, and you look at these texts, I can make a little bit out, but I have to go by the English translations of those
Right.
things a lot of times,
Right.
and the Greek transliterations of those, or the Aramaic or Hebrew transliterations, and then you can look them up, and I can go with it. But
It's a little bit of an aspect of faith there.
it's a complete aspect.
But we're
of it.
seeing an overlap here. I mean, again, a lot of people like to say science and religion, two completely different things, but we see some overlap, and I'm just talking about in belief.
Yes.
Because we're talking about things that you can observe.
Yes.
And of course, when it comes to creation and evolution, creationists believe that God created everything. Evolutionists believe that there was the Big Bang. I wasn't there for either of those things. Nobody was there for
Right.
either of those things.
Right.
I did not observe creation coming into existence, nor did I observe the Big Bang. This is based on faith.
Yes.
This is based on faith.
There is an aspect of faith, and if we're being, and this is what I want to challenge people on in a nice way with a
Right.
smile on my face, can we be honest and challenge our presuppositions? Theists as well as non-theists, can we be honest and challenge our presuppositions and ask the question, if I'm a theist, why do I want God to exist? I do want God to exist because I think it provides a whole lot more meaning to life, and I've strived to live my life based upon his principles, and I like the results that I've gotten. But I also know that if I found out that he didn't, objectively and true, I couldn't keep on going
Right.
in that belief.
Right.
But at the same time, atheists, agnostic, naturalists, hey, can we look at those presuppositions and say, okay, we might say, I just don't think there's enough evidence to show. Well, a lot of other people say that there is. So are we honest enough by asking ourselves the question, why do I not want to have faith in God? Or maybe somebody's honest and said, I do want to have faith in God. I just haven't seen enough to convince me.
Right. And I hear that a lot.
Yep.
I hear that a
But
lot.
let's ask the questions,
Sure.
honestly.
Sure.
So that's the scientific method. Now we'll look at logical reasoning. We have deductive logic. Now, deductive logic draws specific conclusions from general principles, right? So, for example, the classic syllogism, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, Therefore, Socrates is mortal.
Are you sure you're pronouncing that right? I'm pretty sure the pronunciation is Socrates.
It probably is.
And I base this off of, again, showing our age, Bill and Ted's
Bill and
Excellent
Ted.
Adventure.
Yeah, philosophize with him, dude.
Yeah. Let's watch a clip of that real quick. I want you guys to know what we're talking about.
De los Socrates. Socrates. Hey, we know that name.
Yeah. Hey, look him up. Oh, it's under Socrates.
Oh, yeah.
Socrates Johnson, I think, is what he was known as when he was introduced. So
Socrates Johnson. I don't remember that.
Yeah,
part,
yeah.
Okay.
So you got to go back and watch it.
Okay,
you got to go back and watch it. It's great.
Okay, but I mean, yeah, I'm seeing. We're following the bouncing ball, deductive logic.
Yeah.
If this means this, then we can reach this conclusion.
So the weakness and the strength. The strength is if the premises are true, the conclusion's guaranteed. Conclusion is guaranteed. But the weakness is the premises. Right.
If you have a faulty premise, you're going to have a faulty conclusion.
And that's where you attack deductive logic. When I was taking logic in school, when we came across deductive reasoning, we always attacked either the form of the argument. It was written a lot of times like a mathematical equation, and it had to have the correct form. But then the premises had to be true. And so typically that's where you go. You attack the premises and the truth of the premises. So, like for example, the one that we just gave. And you say, okay, all men are mortal. Yeah, I think most people would agree with that. I mean, even a theist, a Christian would say, yeah, all men are mortal. Jesus died. Right. So all men are mortal. So maybe Socrates is a man. If you were going to challenge it, that might be where you go because you're like, okay, did Socrates really exist? Not many people doubt that, but or was he a dog? Was he an alien? Not saying it's aliens.
Right.
But
it's aliens. But I get it. Yeah, you attack the premise because again, if you're concluding this, how did you get there?
Yeah.
And you see that in debate today. People make a lot of conclusions. I mean, a lot of these clips that oversell, as we talked about earlier. Guys who are on college campuses and people come up to the mic and they make pretty bold statements.
Yeah.
And the questions they ask is, okay, well, where do you get that from? Where's that information coming from?
Yes.
Again, it's okay. Well, let's find out how we got there. I get that. All right. So if there's deductive. Logic would dictate that there's also inductive?
Inductive. Yep. Inductive. So that goes the exact opposite way. You're drawing general conclusions from specific observations. So again, scientific method, predicting trends, those types of things, forming scientific theories.
Paying attention to patterns.
Exactly. So for example, let's take a statement after somebody sees a bunch of ravens, they say, okay, all ravens are black. But then that might be suitable for most people, and okay, yeah, I'll go ahead and believe that. But then we start maybe diving in a little bit, and we see, okay, there's some ravens out there that have iridescent feathering, so they appear bluish or purplish or greenish.
Are there any albino ravens?
There are. I looked it up. Albinism is a thing in the raven world.
Okay.
So now you can say ravens are normally all black. However, and you can even put a percentage on it. Maybe 75% are black, and 25% or 20% are, whatever, iridescent or albino or whatever the case is. So inductive, you're never 100% certain of the conclusion. You're always searching for more verification.
Right, because you can't, drawing a conclusion based on evidence that's available, it doesn't mean necessarily that it's a sound conclusion because there could be more evidence out there we haven't examined.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
All right. That makes sense.
And then there's a middle ground one. It's called abductive. And really what that is,
it's the compromise between.
Well, it's a little bit in the middle.
Okay.
It's the most plausible explanation given a particular set of data. So, for example, one of the abductive reasoning is really good when talking about the resurrection of Christ. Okay, so we have this extraordinary claim. Jesus Christ rose from the dead. And you weren't there.
Nope.
I wasn't there.
Nope.
Some people were. Okay, so we have to rely on their testimony. And so if you're going to challenge it, people challenge it there. They're like, were those folks really there?
And that's the same thing that you see today. When you get a witness on the stand for a case, they will question the credibility of the witness.
Absolutely, which they should.
They should.
You should ask the questions. And so now we see, okay, these apostle guys, they hung around Jesus for all this time. When the Romans arrested him and crucified him, they all scattered. And they were hiding. Then 50 days later, They're in the middle of the city of Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost preaching Christianity, and we have verification from external sources that Christianity started in the first century, that this guy Jesus actually existed. We see guys like James, his physical brother, who disbelieved in him his whole life. After his death, we see him in Acts chapter 1 with the rest of the disciples believing. And then we see over in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul just makes this kind of sideways comment when he's finally talking about how Jesus finally appeared to him. He says, oh yeah, he appeared to James. So that lets us know, that little throwaway comment lets us know why James went from a non-believer to a believer when the death of Christ should have said, yeah, he wasn't who he says he was.
Right.
Or said he
was, right? Why did James have such a change of heart?
Exactly. So we start... In tradition states that all of these apostles died horrible deaths. We have all of these people in the first century that died horrible deaths. And so you go back and you think, okay, if we stole the body, because that's another plausible explanation. It is a plausible explanation. Stealing the body, because that's the rumor that got established. And
there's also the faint theory that Jesus was just like so
swoon theory.
The swoon theory. Thank you. Yeah, where it's like, no, he went into a temporary coma or something like that. Passed out.
Yes. And so you have these. And that one I think is the most preposterous. The Romans were really good at it. Yeah. And he wasn't up and at him 3 days later.
Right.
After being buried. But anyway, that's another story. Sure. But stealing the body, great example, right? So does the evidence match stealing the body? If we were all thinking, hey, let's create a movement, let's steal the body, but let's capitalize on this momentum. We got good momentum going. Let's capitalize on this and let's get a bunch of money. And then as soon as they started getting beaten, as soon as they started going into prison, as soon as James gets beheaded in Acts chapter 12, okay, maybe we should rethink our strategy.
This is not going well for us.
This is not going well.
You don't see a whole lot of prosperity gospel preachers these days, going through that kind of thing and still, waving the flag, right?
Right, exactly. So abductive lets us say, okay, the most plausible, and people might think this is preposterous, but this is where the will comes in.
Right.
The most plausible explanation, if these set of facts is true, is that Jesus Christ resurrected from the dead. Or at least they thought Jesus Christ resurrected from the dead. Right. So then we have a different conversation. But that's abductive reasoning.
I gotcha. Okay. All right. So I get that. I understand it. What would come after that then?
We're going to look at historical analysis. So in other words, historical analysis, we are going to combine methodologies. In other words, one methodology isn't necessarily going to work for every situation. With historical analysis, we do use empirical observation. We go out, we dig stuff up. We have archaeology. We have things that prove certain things exist. I saw a reel the other day, and I know this has been out for a while. Archaeologists and historians believe that King David didn't exist at all. And
that's a new one. I haven't heard that claim. Is that a new one?
Yeah, well, there was no evidence that he existed.
Okay.
And then they found, I think it was, I can't remember which Judean or which king from the southern kingdom it was, but it had his name and then it had Son of David. And so it dates way back, and they're like, oh, see, huge archaeological find here. So like I said, I can't remember which king it was, but Son of David.
Right.
And it dates back to way before Christ.
Now, I think it's important to note, though, I mean, that it's a lot of people want to use that to prove that the Bible is divinely inspired, and that's not necessarily what it does.
It doesn't.
Right? I mean, because if we look at a history book, it talks about real people, real places, real events. Are history books divinely inspired? No. But, I mean, at least we're kind of looking at it from a foundational standpoint as being, a credible source when it comes to history. But, okay, the historical analysis, I get it. I mean, are these real places? Are these real people?
Yes.
Did these events actually happen?
Yeah, and the steps that we engage in, first off, before you ever start getting to the point that something's divinely inspired, which is a huge claim, and a lot of books make it.
We're not there yet. We're not there yet.
Nowhere near there yet. We have to go back and find out, well, is it accurate to begin with? And that's why the next episode on canon, it's, okay, what should be in the canon? What isn't in the canon? Why wasn't it in the canon? And again, sometimes the answers to those questions are not as cut and dry as what people want. You know, they want God to have a list and say, okay, these are the books that are in there. But then even if that happened, they would say, well, God actually didn't write that, and this list is bogus. So there's never going to be enough information for everybody
Right.
to say this. But what God does is that he provides enough information for us to make great decisions,
Right.
I believe. So that historical analysis, it's really great. Dead Sea Scrolls, Septuagint, all these different types of things. Archaeology, really, really great things. Which then, you know, textual analysis, which is another one that we go through, goes up underneath that as well. But then we come to something called philosophical inquiry. Philosophical inquiry. This is where a lot of times the scientific method doesn't quite do it justice.
Okay.
Okay, because what we're doing is we're pitting, you know, it's almost like, you know, philosophical Thunderdome. Two philosophies enter, one philosophy leaves.
Whichever one's stronger.
Yeah, exactly.
Whichever
You know?
one has the chainsaw.
Yeah,
Okay.
and well, Tina Turner can't moderate that stuff anymore like she used to. But you know, if we go under the concept, okay, let's take Nietzsche with nihilism. And he created a system, or he proposed a system that stated everybody has the ability and should make up their own moral system, their own moral code.
That's really easy to pick that one apart. But okay, yeah, keep going.
But he was a smart guy. He was
Yeah.
a smart guy, and there's a lot of people that believe that. And I would say it's now if you push people on it,
Yeah.
it falls apart.
Right.
You know, because all basis of law and order goes away. Completely does.
It does, because it kind of goes just on what you feel. We're going back to emotions.
Yes.
We're not looking at things that are objective. We're looking at things that are subjective. And obviously, we're going to have conflicting viewpoints here.
Yeah, I mean, and if my moral system says if somebody has something I want, I just take a metal pipe and beat them upside
And
the
that's
head
okay,
and take it.
because that's your moral system.
Yeah, and then the legal system has no right to prosecute me for it because, hey,
That's your system.
That's my system.
Yeah.
But then if we take, and let's say we have an objective moral system, moral code, legal code, a lot of people don't like that because it's a little bit too rigid, right?
And they might not agree with it.
And it might not, but that takes us back to what? The will.
Right.
The will.
Why is it that you don't agree with it?
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, there's a section of road over here that they changed the speed limit on from 45 down to 35. No reason it should be 35. But you know what I do? I go 35. You know
Right.
why? Not because I feel like I need to. It's so that I don't get a ticket.
Right.
Right. So that's there's all these different things that come as a result of that. So philosophical inquiry, that's going to bring in multiple methodologies.
Yeah, that's going to be a big one.
It is. And
That's
that's
going to be a big one.
we're going to be dealing with that a lot.
We are.
So don't ask for scientific method solely when trying to establish the value of a philosophical system. It's going to be helpful. It might be a part of it,
Yeah.
but it's not going to be the entire thing. It can't be.
Right. And I got to imagine here, and I'm not trying to get too heavy in the first podcast, but here we are. Like, do we see the philosophical inquiry kind of coming in when it comes to, you know, the scientific method maybe not being applied correctly? I'm thinking about like the abortion debate, right?
Sure.
Because you do see some people who say a fetus is a life. Other people say a fetus is not a life. It either is or is not.
Sure.
Right? We have
Sure.
two different viewpoints. Now, they try to say scientifically whether it is or is it not. But from a philosophical standpoint, is this where we start asking the question is, why do you want it to be a life, or why do you not want it to be a life?
We do. And honestly, the argument that I see mostly is not whether it's a life, it's whether it's a person.
Right.
So, because we all know, like, they're looking for life on Mars. So if they happen to find this, I don't think they ever will, but that's not my opinion. Hypothetically, if they were to find the corpse of a single-celled organism, they would scream.
Life is on Mars. We found it.
Life was on Mars, because that single-cell thing is absolutely, or it was alive. It was alive. So we come back down to a pregnancy. It is a self-replicating organism. Yes, it is dependent upon a host. And so I've seen people say, well, it's a parasite.
Right.
You know, I'm like, okay. That's,
Parasites are still alive, but
yeah,
okay.
it's still alive. And so the question really then boils back down to, is it a person? And that is a philosophical debate.
Right.
That is a philosophical debate, and one that is very heated. So because it's philosophical, absolutely our biases, our presuppositions, our motive, our will come into the picture. And so again, taking a step back and saying, I really don't have a leg to stand on if I'm really just going to go on a completely scientific basis. Because if the debate is it alive? The answer is categorically yes.
Right.
It is. That's not the debate. The debate is especially in America, is it covered under the scope of the Constitution?
Right. Right.
Does it have rights? And that's the question.
Or is it women's health care? Yeah, that's
Yep.
so we're kind of seeing the philosophical inquiry kind of being they're trying to meld that with the scientific method, and that's where we see a lot of conflicts.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So next, personal experience.
It's a pretty big one. This is a hard
huge.
one. And now, can you really use this one to determine truth?
Sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, sometimes. So, for example, if I am in the kitchen and I'm working, so I had this pot one time that I put into the oven. I took it out, obviously used a pot holder, took it out, was doing other stuff. And then I thought maybe the handle had cooled off enough, or maybe I wasn't thinking at all. But I grabbed hold of it, and my personal experience told me it was hot.
And the burn on your hand would suggest the same. Okay,
Yeah.
I got you. So it's your personal experience, but that we could still prove it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a personal experience based upon something that I felt and saw, and there was a blister on my hand. It was red. It was pretty sore. So personal experience works good in some areas. I go outside and I see, okay, the sun is up, the sky is blue. It's raining, it's not raining. So personal experience is a good way to dictate in some kinds of truth. But when it comes to more metaphysical things like religious experience, sometimes personal experience is valid because obviously the Bible was written by people who say they had inspiration.
Right.
The Quran is written by someone who says that they had inspiration. Book of Mormon is written by someone who says that they had inspiration. So we have these books that were claimed to be written by somebody who had inspiration. Now we have to go back and ask the question, is there any verifiable empirical evidence that revelation was actually true?
Yeah. That's a hard one to debate with someone as well, because there's times when I've had conversations about spiritual matters with people, and I'm like, well, how do you know this is true when it comes to their spiritual experience? And they'll claim it's because what I felt.
Yes.
And even if you were to show something in black and white writing that would contradict the claim and conclusion they made,
yes,
their reply will be, I know what I felt.
See, and I don't discount people's personal experience.
I don't either.
But I'm not going to use your personal experience to determine truth from my life. So when I see people give testimony, I take it for what it is. Someone says, hey, the Lord changed my life. Great. I can show you other people that the Lord didn't change their life.
Who may have gone through the exact same thing.
Exact same thing. So just because somebody goes and says, the Lord did this miracle in my life, the Lord did this, the Lord did that. Okay, great. That doesn't determine its truth, because you can have somebody from a completely different theological system or an atheistic system that says, I had personal experience that disproves that as a fact.
Right.
So we have to go deeper. And that's one of I am so excited when we get here. It's going to be down the road a little bit, but we're going to get into things, proactive proofs of the scripture that dive into this very thing. You don't have to blindly believe that the Bible's the Word of God.
What?
Matter of fact, God has actually designed it so that that's not the system. That's not the system. Because he knew that there were going to be all these other competing systems, and we had to be able to discern which system was the right one. How do you cut through that noise?
I got to imagine that some people might be somewhat disappointed by that. Now, for some people who want to look at this objectively, they're like, I think it could be very refreshing.
Right.
Because some people were raised to believe in God or believe in Christ. And to think that there's something that could verify what they were raised to believe in.
Sure.
That could be very refreshing for them. Oh, thank goodness there's a reason I can believe in these things and not just blindly. Other people, though, who maybe have depended on personal experience, this could be very alarming. I've met a lot of people who are very comfortable in relying on their personal experiences for their beliefs. because I think at that point they can kind of treat it as a little bit as a hobby, as or a novelty,
Yeah.
Because I mean, how serious are you going to treat something that you're not entirely sure if it actually is true?
What if you run into a situation where you have this personal experience? Let's say you're a Christian, you have this personal experience that you base all your faith on, and then you get into the scripture and you find out that the scripture is actually teaching something contrary to your personal experience.
Yeah.
What do you do then? That's where, and I find a lot of people, if they get to that point, it's a flip of a coin of whether or not they're actually going to be honest and look at it, right? So, yeah, that's exceedingly important. We just have to make sure that we don't use that as the primary. Now,
Sure.
For example, I've got a lot of personal experiences in my faith that are very valid, but I lead with the objective. I don't lead with the personal subjective experiences.
Yeah.
I lead with the objective, and I let the personal experiences fall underneath that and get
Right.
interpreted by that, so that I can make sure I stay grounded and I'm not drifting all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so dangerous. I mean, look, there's times when things have happened to me where I'm like, it's way too coincidental, and you wonder, is this God working in my life? Is his direct intervention? You know what? I can't prove it.
Sure.
I cannot prove it, which of course is why I don't use that.
Right.
So, I mean, it's pretty amazing when these things happen. And I'm sure there's many people out there who've had something occurred in their life where like, wow, is this God working in my life? It's just way too coincidental. It's just way too crazy. It's worked out way too well. Whatever it may be, but can't prove it.
Right.
Can't prove it.
Can't prove it. So, that brings us to the next one, testimony and authority. Relying on eyewitness accounts. We're not going to do this. We talked about this with the court case.
Right.
It requires faith and the validity of the veracity of the witnesses. So next we have things like intuition and common sense.
Common sense. Not as common as you would think.
Not as common.
I kind of like this one because this is like the layman's approach.
Sure.
It's like, I mean, does it just make sense?
So many people that move from atheism to theism or that are theist, they look at this and say, all of this can't have just been self-caused. We can't have something from nothing because common sense teaches us that that's the case. So
scientific method teaches that. But I mean, even from a common sense standpoint.
Sure. But I also know that atheists and agnostics who believe in a naturalistic perspective have ways to deal with that in their mind. But it is a basis of faith because they weren't there. And there's no evidence prior to that. Okay, of nothingness. Right. That I've seen. And again, I'm not an astrophysicist. I'm not anything like that. So, but
what is the theory that the simplest explanation is usually the right one?
Occam's razor.
Occam's razor. Yeah. Again, the simplest theory or explanation is typically the right one. That's common sense.
It is.
That's common sense.
It is.
It's not always correct.
But some would say,
like I said, common sense isn't always correct either.
But this is the will. Someone would say, you're telling me God is the simplest explanation? I think that there's a supernatural being that governs everything. Occam's razor would tell me that it's naturalistic because, again, the will.
Yeah. I mean, you see that a lot of times people will say that, the reason we don't need God anymore is because we have scientific explanations. And the reason that people, believed God so much more predominantly than they do today is because they didn't have the scientific method that we have today.
Sure.
Now we can put a name on these things. We can explain these things. We don't have to go back and rely on God. But again, then we could kind of back up a little bit more. It's like, well, where did these principles, where did they come from?
Right.
Where did this, this framework come from that actually governs everything in our lives?
Yeah, and I can't prove this, but it's my anecdotal experience that the more letters you have after your name, the less likely you are to believe in God, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, 1 Corinthians talks about this. That,
it does.
It's not the wise, according to the world, that really gravitate to this. And I think a lot of that is a lot of people use common sense when looking at the scriptures because it resonates with them. Sure. But again, we're not getting into that at this particular point.
We're not there yet.
We'll get there.
We will get there.
Then one of my favorites, because I love making fun of it, but I'm gonna withhold a lot of my sarcasm.
Not trying to offend anybody.
No, that's definitely not.
It's going to happen eventually. I know, but we're not trying.
Yeah, we're not trying. That's 100% true, which is why I'm restraining. Consensus and tradition. I'm this way because I follow this philosophy or religion because I was born this way, because my parents followed it, because my grandparents followed it. It goes back, 5,000 generations, and we've always been this way. That is a horrible way to determine truth.
So when we're talking about determining truth, we're actually peppering in some ways, how not to determine truth.
Exactly. So tradition is not great. That's why I'm not a fan of faiths that rely tremendously on tradition when there's no way to actually document it. That's why I believe firmly that God used the written word for this, in that's because that's provable.
Right.
Oral tradition you can't prove.
Right.
There's
a game of telephone.
Yeah, it's totally the game of telephone. And you can see, you look at the picture of the church in the New Testament, how austere it was. And then you look at some of the things that we see today, and you're like, dude, that is not the same.
Right.
What got lost in the translation there? Right.
Easy to compare.
And,
when you see the lights, when you see the fog machines, when you see the preachers coming in on jetpacks,
yes,
it's all next. About God, y'all.
That's next. And so you can see why you have a lot of people that are falling away from that version of Christianity, because they're looking at it like, dude, that is not that. You can tell, going back to common sense, that is not what this should be.
Right. And I see that a lot. I officiate weddings on the weekends, and it's this really weird phenomenon that's happening where I feel like every other couple I work with, somebody has a Catholic background who are no longer participating in Catholicism. And typically is that they're starting to ask questions. And I like this about people because they've been discouraged, because, some families that are Catholic, they are really Catholic, and you are going to be raised to be Catholic. And they're questioning, well, why do we do it this way? Why do we dress this way? Why are the services in Latin so that we can't, understand certain things? They're asking these questions because, just because we've always done it this way, does it make it right?
Right.
And it's really easy to find the contradictions too. I mean, you take Hinduism, people are raised to believe that there's hundreds, thousands of gods, something like that?
Hundreds of millions from what I saw.
Okay. And in Christianity, there's one.
Yeah.
Okay. But people are raised to be Christians or believe in one God. Okay, well, you got some people who are raised to believe in hundreds of millions of gods. Some people who are raised to believe in one. Well, there's either one or there's hundreds of millions or there's something in between. Both cannot be correct.
Sure. But actually, one of the things that I've seen is that there's a lot of people moving back towards Catholicism because of the hundreds and thousands of years of tradition that are associated with it. So we're going to be getting into a little bit of Catholicism next week when we're dealing with things like the Apocrypha and Orthodox as well.
Sure.
But again, we're not there yet. But we will be discussing different belief systems and the evidence for different things way on down the road probably.
But the point is consensus and tradition.
Consensus and tradition.
We don't use that when trying to determine truth.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Revelation.
This sounds like personal experience a little bit.
Not quite, because, well, yes, it's a personal experience if I have a revelation or not, right?
Yeah.
But what's the proof behind that? So all of the Bible claims to be given by inspiration or revelation.
And there's even the very last book of the Bible is Revelation. So it's kind of interesting bringing this up.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
So you have a lot of the prophets in the Old Testament. They use the concept of the oracle of God, the burden of God that's been given to them.
Taken up in the Spirit.
Which is a claim of inspiration. It's a very strong claim of inspiration. You have Paul stating that, hey, all Scripture is inspired of God. And, Peter saying that prophets weren't moved of themselves, but moved of the Holy Spirit. So you get these claims, and the entirety of the Bible rests upon inspiration or revelation. But the question is, how do we know that's true? And so God, knowing what we were going to face, places in there verifiable things so that we can know whether things are truly inspired. Matter of fact, in the Old Testament, he said that if a prophet makes a prophecy and it doesn't come true, that person's not a prophet. Now, we have to distinguish between prophecies that came true versus ones that are still ongoing. But really, the bottom line is that you have hundreds, and we will get into several of these, of prophecies in the Old Testament about who Jesus was going to be, what the church was going to be, this kingdom that he was going to establish. And
what Christians were going to be?
Yes, and we're going to get into a lot of that. And what that does is that we can actually use third-party historical sources to verify a lot of these. These are the links that God went to, as opposed to other books that just claim to be inspired, but maybe don't have the proof backed up. But again, we'll get into that.
Yeah, but this is kind of interesting because, again, we talked about how curiosity is typically discouraged.
Yeah.
Right? You don't want to ask questions because salvation is based on faith. And that kind of also implies that that's how God wants a person to believe in them.
Yes.
In him. That he wants you just to believe blindly.
Yes.
And that's it. And if you don't, there's something wrong with you.
There's something wrong.
But what you're indicating here is that God knew that people would have questions and they would need something to build their faith. So he put a process in place in order to build it.
100%.
Rationally.
100%.
Objectively.
Yes. Yes. And what that does is helps us to distinguish between revelations. You have a lot of people today that say they have revelation.
Yeah.
God spoke to me and said this. And some of this stuff is just nuts. I saw one the other day.
Talking about Waco, baby. Waco, Texas. Yeah,
well, no, I'm thinking of guys like Kenneth Copeland.
Yeah.
Well, I saw one of his just the other day
Yeah.
where he said, okay, I made a covenant with God that, in 2056 is when I'm going to leave, and he's going to be 120 years old or something, so I'll see you there. What happens if he dies, which he probably will? What happens when he dies before he's 120? My point is that how do you know that's true? Mm-hmm. How do you know that's true? So we have to be able to determine whether or not somebody is accurately presenting revelation.
Right.
Because you've got a lot of people that do a lot of things because people say God spoke to them.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is nuts.
Right. Right. So it's got to be authenticated. It's got to be proven.
Yeah.
And there's a process for that. Okay.
And if they're wrong once and they have to, like Harold Camping, do you remember that dude?
It rings a bell.
Okay. So I can't remember the name of his radio show, but that guy, I think the Parks and Rec reasonableists were based on him a little bit because
Okay.
they always had different dates for
the guys who believed like a big
Zorp.
lizard. Yeah, Zorp, the lizard guy who's coming. Okay.
Yeah, it's I read the text wrong, or maybe it's Hal Lindsey. He
Right.
did that stuff too.
Yeah.
But Harold Camping kept on coming up with dates of the second coming and kept on changing
I didn't
them.
carry the one when I was doing the math.
Right.
And that was my bad, but now
Right.
I've done it, and now it's going to be this date.
So
For
guess
sure.
what? First time he was wrong. We should have known people should have known he's a false prophet a long time
Right.
ago. But the very first time he's wrong, you lose all credibility
you're done.
forever
Right.
with prophecy.
Right.
Forever.
I like how you put it in with prophecy. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Because, as a father and husband, I've said things and I've been wrong about it, but I'd
Yeah.
like to think that you can still look at me as a good husband and a good father.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate you putting in with prophecy.
with prophecy.
Yeah.
Saying that God spoke to you, if that prophecy is wrong, you are 100% ruled
Yeah.
out forever
Yeah.
of being that.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
And then one last one, pragmatic testing. In other words, does it work? That's good if you're like a carpenter or a plumber.
Right.
Not necessarily great when we're dealing with philosophical systems
Sure.
because sometimes, so let's say telling the truth, right? So if you're raising your kids and you're telling them to tell the truth and, they tell the truth and they get in trouble, but if they lie, they go away scot-free because nobody finds out.
Yeah.
Does it work? Pragmatic testing, I'm going to be a liar.
Right. Right.
Right? So pragmatic
sense.
testing.
Makes sense.
But sometimes it works. Again, right method for the right subject.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that's you can apply that across the board. I grew up and my stepdad, he would have us out raking leaves with like a garden rake. The one that's used to like make rows for you to plant seeds. I'm like, this is not the right tool for the job.
That's bad.
It's not the right tool
Yeah.
for the job, right? Let's just go buy a $10 rake so we can actually have it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can appreciate this, where we're trying to make sure that we're using the right tool for the job.
And when you're using the wrong tool for the job, you've probably done this at times. You're like, okay, I could either just go to Home Depot or Lowe's or the hardware store, grab the right tool, and come back and do it, and it will take you like 2 minutes.
You'll save time.
Or I'm going to spend an hour getting frustrated using the wrong tool, and it's not going to turn out right.
The results
the
are still
same
gonna be
thing's
bad.
true with
Okay.
what we're talking about here. So, not using the right tool, you can make all kinds of mistakes. You can mismatch different systems, and you can come away with faulty conclusions. So, and ultimately, you undermine your credibility as a person. So, I always want to make sure we're credible. Look, we're probably going to make mistakes. Matter of fact, I guarantee you we're going to make some mistakes.
And some of you may tell us that we've made a mistake.
And that's fine. We're very much looking forward to that. Well, maybe looking forward is too strong of a word, but no, seriously, we want truth.
Right.
So, but there's a conspiracy theory for everything out there.
There is.
And I'm interested in evidence.
Right.
I'm interested in evidence. So we will probably make corrections on how things go. Maybe sometimes we'll overstate conclusions. Maybe sometime, this is the way inductive concepts work. We'll research more, we'll find more evidence, and we'll make a correction or add to it, whatever the case is. We're not infallible. Right. Nobody is. So we're just wanting to make sure that we handle this philosophical opening of Cat CPR, let you know where we're coming from, let you know what our philosophy is.
That we have a planned approach.
Yeah, we have a planned approach. We're not winging it. I mean, obviously, the 97th time we're recording this, we're not winging it. We're really wanting to get down to truth. So,
and we're trying to treat it with the level of importance that it requires.
Yeah, and trying to treat each other and you with respect.
Absolutely.
And how we operate.
So I think we built a pretty good foundation going forward, helping people know how we're going to approach this, what methods and tools we're going to be using as we kind of go through this. And our plan is to release one episode every month. Of course, this is our January episode, so there'll be another one coming out in February. Matt, what can they look forward to for the February episode?
We're going to hit them with the big guns. We're going to go into canon.
I see what you did there.
See?
Yeah. I mean, and you've been a dad for a long time, and your dad joke game it's pretty strong.
Thanks.
It's pretty strong. Okay, so talk about canon. Of course, we're not talking about actual guns, but
right. We're talking about
the books that make up the Bible.
Old Testament. We're going to start there. Is the Old Testament? Are those books that are in there? Is that the way that it always was?
Are they supposed to be in there?
Are they supposed to be in there? What about the Apocrypha? You have some listings that have the Apocrypha, some listings that don't have the Apocrypha. The extra books that are in some people's Old Testament. And we're just going to talk about the evidence, look at the early church writing, look at the Jewish sources, and see extra biblical writers like Josephus, Philo, those types of things, and say, okay, what did these people recognize at this time frame? What was in the canon? And is there some methodology that was used? And there was. It's definitely not going to be to everybody's level of what they're looking for, but there's very, very, very strong evidence that the Old Testament that we have in the quote unquote Protestant Bible is what was accepted, and the others were added, and it's fairly dubious as to why they were added.
Okay, well that's awesome. I mean, that's gonna. I imagine this next episode might be a little bit longer than this one, given the gravity and everything we're going to be going over. But excellent. Well, we really appreciate everybody tuning in and watching. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can catch us on Spotify. If you're watching us on Spotify or listening to us, you can catch us on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe and send us a like. Until next time, I'm Jeremiah.
I'm Matt.
And we appreciate you watching. We'll see you next one.